Hello and welcome to the channel of Sigma Plus Industrial Solutions. In that video, we're going to start talking about the probabilities and the different types of the probabilities distributions and the importance of studying the probabilities in the Six Sigma. This video is considered to be the first video in the series of the probabilities, in where we should start from the basic level, so we make sure that we have a strong understanding about the probabilities, as it will be frequently used in the statistical tools, such as the hypothesis testing, the ANOVA, the one sample or the two samples hypothesis testing, and even in other types of data distributions. So that's why it's so important to make sure that we have a strong understanding for the probabilities from the basic levels till the higher advanced level that will be needed in the statistical studies. So let's see what is the topic of today. Okay, so in the topic of today, we're going to talk mainly about the probability. What the probability is, what are the terms of the probabilities, and what are the types of the probabilities: the classical, the empirical, and the subjective probability. In other videos, we're going to talk about the intersection and unions of the probability, the conditional probability, and the independent and dependent events. We're going to talk also about the multiplication rules for the probabilities, the mutually exclusive events, and the addition rules of the probabilities. And we will end the basics of the probabilities with the counting principles for the permutation and the combinations. Then we will go through the more advanced level and the probability distributions, where we will start talking about the discrete probability distribution, the binomial probability, the Poisson probability, and ending with the normal probability distributions, with the calculation of the probabilities, the standard deviations, the mean of the data distributions. As I mentioned, this is highly frequently used in the statistical tools, and it's so important that before that you go to the statistical study, that you make sure that you are prepared with the basics understand of the probability. So what is the probability? Simple as is. The probability is the likelihood of the occurrence of a specific event. This event could be any interested events that you need to know. In many cases, we are not 100% sure, or we're not confident about the occurrence of future events. And that's why we need to study the probabilities through the implementation of the statistical tools. The probability had been also widely used in different sectors in our life nowadays, such as the weather forecast, where we forecast the possibility of rainings within the next coming days, or snowing, or even the temperature rate within the days. What would be the temperature in the next coming hours? Probability had been also used widely in the sport activities, like today, for example, football teams started to study the probabilities by understanding where could be the best locations that the players could score goals, based on the history of frequent goals that have been scored from different locations at the playground. Okay. Terms of probability. The first term is known to be the experiment. And the experiment is the process of measuring or observing an activity for the purpose of collecting the data. You're doing an experiment because there is a certain result of that study that you want to conclude. Simple example: rolling a pair of dice. The outcome, it's the particular result of that experiment. What is the result that you have found? As an example, rolling a pair of 2 with a dice. Then we have the sample space. The sample space are all the possible outcomes of that experiment. So in some conditions, you know what are all the possible outcomes. Like, for example, you have the pair of dices. which contain numbers from 1 to 6. So that means that the sample space for our experiment will be the numbers that start from 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. And what could be the possible outcome? Is all the possible numbers matching with both dices, such as 1 and 1, 2 and 2, and 3 and 2, and so on. The event, the fourth term of the probability. The event is one or more of the outcomes of the interest for the experiment, and which are a subset from the sample space. For example, if my interest event is to have a total of 2 and 3 or 4 or 5 from rolling the pair of dice. So the highlighted in yellow are showing my interested event. Types of the probability, starting with the classical probability. And the classical probabilities, it refers to the situation when all the outcomes of the possible outcomes of the probabilities are known, such as the example of the pair of dice, where we know what could be the total possible outcomes. So if I'm looking to my event that I need a total of 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, this is my interested outcome, and I know the total possible outcomes from that experiment. This is considered to be a classical probability, and it can be calculated through the formula PA, where P is the short term of the probability and A is my event name, and it is calculated by dividing the number of the possible outcomes in which event A occurs by the total number of possible outcomes in a sample space. So in this condition, the total probability of having a 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 numbers from the rolling the dices will be 10 divided by 36. So 10 is the number of the possible outcomes. So you can see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And all the total possible outcomes are 36. Okay, you have 6 horizontally and 6 vertically, 6 multiplied with 6, so it's 36. So what is the event, the probability that I could have a number of 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 will be 10 divided by 36, which is equal to 28%. The second type of the probability is known to be the empirical probability. And the empirical probability, it refers to the situation when we don't know what are all the possible outcomes, but we refer to the frequency, the history of the frequent occurrence. Okay, so it refers to the situation where there is no quite information about the process to determine the outcomes, and can be calculated through the shown formula, where the probability of that event is the frequency of the event occurrence divided by the total number of observation. So considering the shown table is a history log of frequent failure types for a certain power electrical product, what's the probability of the protection relay malfunction? So if we look to that table, this is a history log for the different failures that have been occurred for a certain period of time, like last year or last 6 months. And you can see there are different categorized failures for that power electrical product and how frequently did it occurred. So if we are looking to the protection relay malfunction, it occurred 16 times. If we look to the failure of the transformer oil leakage, it happened 11 times. Or any control issues, it occurred 10 times within the last period. So what would be the probability in the future that we could have a protection relay malfunction? Is simply 16 divided by the total number of the frequency of the failure, which is 75. So dividing 16 by 25 will be 21%. That's the probability of the occurrence, and that's what we call the empirical probability. Or in other way, I can say what could be the probabilities of having a protection relay malfunction or a transformer oil leakage, then I can sum the 16 and the 11 and divide it by 75. So that will be about 36% probability of the occurrence of any of those both defect or failure. The third type of the probability is known to be the subjective probabilities. And that refers to the situation when you don't have any kind of information, either the possible outcomes, or you don't know what's the history log of frequency of occurrence. And in that case, in situation, we rely upon our experience, such as referring to a situation when we cannot use the classical and the empirical probabilities, and we rely mainly upon the experience to estimate the outcome based on the individual's personal assessment of the likelihood of an event occurring. So such as in the photo, there is a gentleman with his wife, they are watching a football match, and the guy was guessing that the goalkeeper will save that ball due to his experience with how fit was the goalkeeper and how the skills, how is the skills of the goalkeeper from recent matches that he have seen. So he observed that this goalkeeper was playing good, and based on that, he had an impression that the goalkeeper would save the goal. Like he said that, I told you he has a fast reaction and he would save that ball. So that's what we mean with the subjective probability. Or another example, such as a student that had been studying so strong during the year, and then his father is speaking with his wife, and he's telling her, don't worry, I know that he will pass well and he will do well in the exams, because the father had experienced that his son was studying well during the last years and he was passing well all the exams. And that's another example about the subjective probabilities. Okay, so I can understand this is very basic information about the probabilities for that video, but it's very important to make a quick refresh about those basic informations as we are going to go in more deep knowledge for the next probability studies. So at the end of that video, I would like to thank you for your good listening and watching, and see you for the next time. Thank you.